at the end of the day. And the only way we deliver value to our customers in any industry is through the delivery of our business processes, right? You can't deliver value to customers without a business process.
Welcome to Process Pioneers, the show that takes a deep dive into the minds of decision makers, key influencers, and process experts who are pioneering the world of everything process.
Welcome to another episode of Process Pioneers. My name is Rayner, and I'm the host of Process Pioneers. And in each of these episodes, I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with various people from different organizations, working in a number of different roles, but all based around the topic of process or business process management and what that is for an organization. What does that mean for an organization? And I guess the value that an organization can realize through business process management. And today I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with Sandra Moorhead. Now, Sandra is the head of enterprise process transformation at Kiwi Bank and has worked in a number of organizations relating to financial services. I'm really excited for this interview. Sandra, thanks for joining me.
Oh, no worries. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me along.
Great. So what we might do to begin with is I'll pass it off to you to, I guess, give us a little bit more context, a little bit more background into, I guess, when you were first introduced to the idea of managing your business processes, and then take us on a journey leading up to what you're doing today.
Yep, sure. So I've kind of got two stories, both involving process epiphanies. And the first one was when I was a chartered accountant working in a law firm in Bristol in the UK. So that was my, first career, if you like. I'm completely unsuited to being a chartered accountant. It just doesn't suit me at all. I really like numbers, but that repetition and that, producing reports that nobody reads thing, not my sort of bag at all.
Yes.
So I was working at this law firm, Osborne Clark, which I have tremendously fond memories of working out with. Some really incredibly skilled and talented people. And our COO sent all of the back office leadership team onto project management, process improvement, and change management training. And it was just like, it literally was an epiphany. The clouds opened and the bolt of lightning came down. Oh my goodness, all that lean, just the basics of lean, the elimination of waste, it just absolutely sang to me. So from then on, I basically used those sorts of skills and techniques in all of my roles. So even when I wasn't doing a process role, you kind of take those best practices along with you. And the second one was when I got my first full-time process job, which was at Westpac. And there was a process office set up because we'd accidentally given away $10 million, which is really unfortunate. Because it's front page of the Herald, right? That $10 million is a lot of money in New Zealand, right?
Yes.
It's front page of the Herald stuff. It dogged our reputation for a long time. So the company did what it always did when stuff goes wrong. It tried to find someone to blame. So I brought some of the consultants in, and they basically said, well, look, you can't blame someone because there's no documented procedures or, no documented process. So there wasn't a right way of doing things. You can't blame someone for doing something the wrong way if nobody knew what the right way was.
Right.
To cut a long story short. So they set me up with a team, and it was our job to essentially document what the bank's processes were and make sure that everybody adhered to them, which are two different things. And that was fantastic. And I worked within the IT strategy team, which is really interesting choice because our CIO looked after ops as well. But there I got exposure to all sorts of technology, particularly around BPMSs. I don't know if that's the right word. And I was talking to my boss, and what we were doing is we were doing user manuals, so operating instructions. And I said to him, yep, making good progress. We did them, and we coached people, and the number of risk incidents fell, and, and all this sort of stuff. So it was doing what it said on the tin. I said, but
right.
It's going to take us about 500 years to actually get to where we want to go. And he said, and that's why God invented BPM. So I said, what's that? And he said, and that's why God invented Google. So I went off because he was pretty self-serve sort of a guy. So I went off and Googled BPM and BPMSs, and it was like, oh my goodness. Again, second epiphany of my career. And, there's absolutely a place for, work instructions and all that sort of stuff. but not on their own. Absolutely not on their own.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we brought in IBM BPM, and that's when we first started doing a lot of stuff around workflow and just understanding things about like WIP management and Little's Law and, you know, all that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's great.
Yeah, really good.
And you mentioned something there about, you know, documenting your processes versus actually doing those processes that are documented. And I think that that's an interesting point that I'd like to touch on, because I think there are organizations out there that, you know, they go through a process of documenting what they think's happening. But if there's no, I guess, communication, or if there's no way for the end user to easily consume what the processes are meant to be, you could have a number of different ways that same process is actually being outworked, just because this person finds it slightly better doing it this way and this other person prefers to doing it that way. So I guess, how does an organization go from documenting what they would like to get done, and the end, I guess the process practitioners actually following that and carrying that out? Yeah,
that's a huge challenge. So that's, for me, that's more on the knowledge management side of things. And I've been doing a load of research in this, because I can't find really good you know, examples of how it's done well on that knowledge management side of things. So we used coaches. So literally we had physical people whose job it was to coach people in the right process. And I know we do that in the bank at the moment around like credit decisioning and stuff like that. But you know, there's nothing to stop people doing the wrong thing, you know, and because you can't see it. And that's where that whole visibility around process becomes really important, because if you can actually see when things are going wrong, and you can normally see that because something's either being done too quickly or too slowly, that's when you can kind of stage an intervention sort of thing. And it might be that there's a learning that needs to be passed on to everybody else about a really good way of doing something, or it could be somebody's actually not performing a really important compliance step and they need some coaching in that area. So really challenging unless you have process visibility around process instances. And that to me is what BPM is about. It's actually managing the individual instances as well as managing the process as a whole.
Yes. And I think that visibility is so key. It's so crucial, especially after the year that we've had, and where some organizations, they've gone from having entire office buildings filled with employees to the next week, their employees spread out across the country. You know, who knows where they're working? They're working from home offices, but it's not all together in the one place. So I think that, you know, having that process visibility is such a key thing, especially going through challenges like the year we've had. Yeah, and there's the knowing what to do with it as well. So when I did our first BPM process at Westpac was credit card disputes. So that's when you get a transaction on your credit card statement, you don't know what it is and you want to dispute it. You know, the team were completely miserable, grey faces, just, you know, they hated coming into work. They'd work every fourth weekend, clear the backlog, get on top of things, and then 4 weeks later they'd be back where they were in square one. So we put, it was just a kind of basic workflow over the top of it, really, not a lot of automation. It was only like, I don't know, five steps or something, with a form on the front. But what that did was that enabled the team leader to see where things were taking too long. But the interesting thing was the original team leader had the same visibility. So I would, it was an MVP to start with. So we would just download the data into Excel and send out the reports every day. So it wasn't even real time. And she didn't do anything with them, didn't do anything with them at all. Right? So I was sitting there thinking, why isn't she doing something with this information? And she was sitting there thinking, why does Sandra keep sending me all these spreadsheets? You know, because if somebody's never had the information before, it's just done to assume that if you provide them with the information that they're going to know what to do with it. Yes. So she left the organization. I think she was thoroughly miserable anyway, got a new team leader in, and for some reason he knew what to do. So he had a look at the longest things that were taking the longest, found out where the delays were, and it's quite a small team. There's only about half a dozen people. And then, some people would write to a customer and wait 28 days and then close it. Some people would ring a customer, wait a week, write to them, wait 2 weeks and then ring them again, something like that. So there's no standardization. And until we put the workflow in,
or the BPMS in, there was no way of seeing it either. So he basically worked with the team and they just standardized it. We said, we'll ring them, we'll follow it up with a letter, and then we'll ring them again after a week. And we'll do that for 3 weeks before we close it.
Yes, right.
So the turnaround time plummeted, the work in progress plummeted. I mean, it was just, within 2 months of this guy joining, WIP was a third of its pre-BPM levels, or the pre-team leader levels, to give the guy his due credit.
Yes.
The turnaround time had halved. And there was no exceptions. So exceptions were things that were over 50 days old, because you lose all your chargeback rights then, so you just have to write it off. So that's basically financial hit. There was no more financial hits to the business.
Yeah, wow.
All because there was 2 things: providing the information and doing something with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So, otherwise I was about to give up and go home, actually, but I have that guy to thank.
That's great. And like, obviously talking about having information and getting people to use it, that's one challenge that you've mentioned. What are some of the other big challenges that an organization will face when they are adopting BPM? Yeah,
so the next process I did after credit card disputes was switching, for when people want to switch to the bank. And this is at Westpac as well. And it was really interesting. Did the same thing. It was just a basic form with a few-step workflow behind it. Not a lot of automation in there. A lot of logic in the form to prevent errors coming through. And there was absolutely zero impact on the process performance.
Right.
There was nothing. And the reason was there was no behavior change on the part of the team. So their mindset was, all of the problems that we have is the information coming in from our frontline staff. So, it's all their fault. We're awesome. Get them to change what they do, but then they weren't willing to change themselves.
Right.
So for me, it's and I heard something. I won't tell you where I went because I was so appalled. I heard something. I was in a workshop, and we were talking about small business lending. And someone was saying, oh, it's not right. You've got these small businesses and they ask us for money and we tell them to send us all this information. And sometimes it takes ages to do it. And then when they do, they want the money straight away. So they shouldn't go at the front of the queue. And it's like, oh, my husband runs a small business and he works 80, 90 hours a week. And I assure you, filling in forms for the bank is way down his list of priorities, because he's trying to look after his customers. And actually, they're our customers.
Yes.
That whole where awesome either blame the customer or blame somebody further upstream in the process is it's just endemic, I've found, and just really common, and not being able to move past that and actually make the change yourself is the biggest obstacle. You can buy all the best technology in the world, but if people aren't willing to change, then it really won't deliver any value. All you'll see, which is what we had with that credit card disputes example I told you about, all that happens is you can see how bad things are.
Yes.
You actually want things to get better. That's your end outcome.
Yes, that's right. And talking about, obviously, your husband running a small business, he's a customer of that bank, and how much of your, like, I guess as a BPM practitioner, as someone that's looking at the organization's end-to-end processes, understanding, well, what are our internal processes? And then you've also got the customer journey as well, like the external processes. What is the journey they take, and what are they going on? And I guess it's harder to get that feedback, maybe, I would assume, from your customers. I mean, if they're really dissatisfied, they're probably going to leave a review or something like that. But if they're just slightly dissatisfied or somewhat dissatisfied, they're probably not going to spend the time like letting you know or giving that feedback through. But how important is it to balance, I guess, that process management for the internal processes versus the external processes?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was doing some work with my team, and I was explaining the black box pool concept of BPMN.
Yeah.
And that was freaking people out. But they go, oh, but we know what they do because they do this. I said, but you don't really know. You don't know if they're going to go off and get competitor rates from other banks. You don't actually know what they are doing. So it's just trying to imagine it's a customer journey inside the black box pool.
Right.
So we work in Kiwi Bank. We work really closely with our customer journeys team. So we're just implementing Aris, and as part of that, we're documenting our customer journeys in Aris, and as part of that customer journey is the internal process that relates to that the particular touch point on the customer journey.
Yes.
And that's really important. And I think one of your questions was, about the benefits and what's the biggest benefit. It has to be customers. Australia, I think, is very similar to New Zealand in that none of the banks consistently outperform the others. They're all pretty mediocre when it comes to customer service. And Kiwi Bank is all about making Kiwi better off. And we are working incredibly hard actually to make sure that we keep our customer promises. And in terms of any organization, that keeping your customer promises, it's the most important thing you can do. The fact that you get efficiency at the end of it in terms of your OPEX and stuff, that's lovely, but that shouldn't be why you're doing it.
Right.
Your biggest why has to be your customers, because that's why your organization exists.
Yes. And you mentioned
cost out is the most depressing motivator in the history of mankind.
Yes, right.
It's hard to get really excited about it, and you have people going, what we're going to do, we're going to take some cost out. It's like, I was kind of hoping to do something awesome, I was kind of hoping,
Yes. And you mentioned earlier about, I guess, a specific example where the process time was cut in half, or you identified areas of the process that could be improved. Do you have any examples or other examples of wins that you've been part of where the organization has implemented a process change, whether it was an incremental tweak or whether it was a radical innovation, and it delivered great value to that organization?
Yeah, we did some RPA. And the processes where it went in, it pretty much revolutionized them. You're talking about eliminating 90% of the manual effort.
Right.
Hugely successful. What we realized, though, was that a lot of our processes weren't ready for automation.
Right.
So you need to have certain things to be true, right? So you need to have a consistent process. You need to know what your process is. Otherwise, it's going to automate, right? The way you do it, the way I do it. So you need to know what it is. You need to have a single queue, or at least an understanding of your queues. And you need to have structured, validated, digitized inputs, because at the scale you're at in New Zealand, it's way too expensive and time consuming to get software to read emails and interpret them and stuff like that. We just haven't got the case for it. Our volumes, we're a small country, our volumes are really small. So it really needs to be this stuff where it's really easy to understand process with easy to articulate business rules as well. And that's their automatable processes. And what we found was that we'd actually thought that about 70, I think we estimated about 70 to 80% of our volumes came in via internal forms, which were electronic.
Right.
And what we found out, it was actually less than a third. There was about another third email, and the other third was, phone, fax, carrier pigeon, all that sort of stuff. And so the size of the prize, just like shrunk overnight, sort of thing.
Yes.
We actually pivoted then to moving to getting those foundations in place. And this to me is really key for the business process management. Get your basics right, get your cues right, get your inputs right, and then you can manage your processes. If it's chaos, which essentially it was, you can't automate it, you can't manage it. And your first step should be management before automation as well.
Yes.
In my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think, there are a lot of organizations out there that if they see their competitor doing it, they'll tend to jump on that bandwagon without maybe having the same culture in place, or the same sponsorship in place, or the same whatever it might be. That if they see it working for that organization, well, then sometimes they can jump at technologies like automation when they're not ready for it. So I think, having the foundations in place is important.
Yeah, I mean, so these numbers aren't particularly huge, just bearing in mind it's New Zealand. So we'd have saved, I don't know, something like 10 FTE from the automation piece, but we saved 20 to 30 from the putting in proper cues.
Right.
And all we did was have like a form with it was a one-step workflow, if you like. So a form gets delivered to someone else, and that saved us 20 to 30 FTE. And then you can automate on the back of that. So now I've moved on from there now, but now my friend still works there. She looks after our robots, and she says they're putting more processes through now that those foundations are in place.
Yes.
There's a lot more automatable opportunity there.
Yes. Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that's, that the value that you're talking about there, that's what executives or senior leadership, that's what they want to know or need to know if they're going to embark on business process management is, well, what's the return on investment going to be and how long is it going to take before I realize it? So I guess for someone listening right now that they're in an organization where they haven't adopted BPM, but it's being talked about or they're beginning early stage discussions. How do you get that senior leadership sponsorship or buy-in? Like what language do you have to use or how do you communicate in a way that I guess speaks to their needs and speaks to their wants?
Yeah, it's funny you should mention that actually, because as I said, we've just brought Aris into Kiwi Bank, which is fantastic. So we're just getting that set up, and we basically built the business case on the really uninspiring, it'll take us less time to deliver projects because we'll understand current state, right? So, for a business case, you need to have a payback period and, return on investment and all that sort of stuff. But it's quite uninspiring, right? And my boss isn't a process person, but I've managed to turn him. So I think just talking about, talking about things like, customer experience is really important and how they support customer journeys and stuff like that. So what I did, I had to do a demo to our executive team as we brought the tool in. So what I did was I basically got the minimum in there possible that I could make a demo out of that would impress them. So I hoped would impress them. So basically we had a customer journey in there. We've got a target operating model in there. And yes, we've got some process maps in there, but we've got the applications catalog there and the org structure in there as well. So when I'm demoing it, I'm kind of saying, yeah, look, here's a process map. But to quote our wonderful friend, Roger Tregear, no business ever had the problem, I haven't got enough process maps, right? Mm-hmm. So there's no point in saying you can have loads of process maps because that's, even I find that particularly uninspiring. But if I say, here's a process map and here's the application it's used, and if we're wanting to replace that application, just by doing this, I can see the scope of everything that uses that application. Or if I get run over by a bus tomorrow and I'm the owner for this process, you can see all of the processes that I'm responsible for, so somebody can come in and understand what it is that they have to do. Or if we're looking at this customer journey, which we should be, because you have to line it back to your strategy as well. This is our key strategic value stream, this is our key moment of truth, and this is how we've decided we're going to compete. Show that in the customer journey, or try and make it look pretty as well, so that pictures are good, and then say, and look, if I'm looking after this customer journey or this particular moment of truth, and I know somebody on the call is, what I'm going to be really interested in is what business processes are we operating at that moment of truth. So what do I need to change in order to deliver at this moment of truth? Because delivering on this moment of truth is how we're going to achieve our strategic goals.
Yes.
And then I click on that process and it goes to the process map.
Yes.
So
that's great. And I think, what you mentioned there about you could, anything could happen if you walk out the door of your organization. You could win the gold lotto. You could be, I guess, less fortunate in other ways. But if you've got people walking in and out of your organization every day with knowledge stored in their heads that isn't documented anywhere, it's not a very reliable source of storage, if you could call it that. And so it is really important for an organization to, I guess, have that security or that knowledge base where if anything happens, you've still got that knowledge. You can bring someone new in, and instead of them having to go on a 10, 20, 30 year journey of building that same knowledge that the previous employee had, they can pick it up much quicker because it's all documented down there.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, that's good. And now also talking about buy-in, we were talking obviously about getting buy-in or sponsorship from senior leadership. How do you go about getting buy-in or sponsorship from the process practitioners, the frontline employees, the ones that are picking up the phone call or in the warehouse or factory doing the work? Because obviously they're the ones whose processes you are changing or you are adapting or whatever you might be doing it under the banner of managing them. How do you bring them along for the journey where you're probably still going to get a little bit of resistance here and there, but you obviously want to reduce that resistance as much as possible?
Yeah, so for me, this I read a really good Gartner paper on it, actually. You can get your hands on it, and it basically says 4 different types of process mapping or BPMS type scenario. So one of those is knowledge management. So that's something that end users can do to find out what button do I press next. But that's very different to a business analyst coming along and we're doing an application replacement and we need to understand the scope of what's being changed in the project. And they're kind of different tools that do that as well. So ProMap, for example, is extremely good for end users.
Right.
Something like Aris is definitely more of an architecture solution. And I think all of the tools try to say that they're all things to all people, but realistically speaking, they're not.
Right.
So for our, in terms of Aris, the business case we built was absolutely around the business architecture. Not that I ever call it that to anybody in our executive team, because that'll just switch them off. But where I have done information for end users, which is one of the first things I did because we had to stop people accidentally giving away $10 million. It was really fortunate, if you like, because the leaders in that business unit had very strong memories of exactly what happened when that went down, because you can imagine, I mean, it was absolutely horrific for anybody involved in it. So, and everybody understood there was that story that that people could hold on to. So when we had the coaches and when we had the documentation, obviously they were involved in the creation of it, that it just became a lot more meaningful to them. But it's kind of like any change management, you've kind of got to have it as user-led as possible. Like with Aris, what we're doing now is mostly around the business analyst practice. So my team is made up of business analysts who our wonderful BA lead has loaned to me for the purposes of doing this. There we have a BA focus group, so it's absolutely all about the BAs, what's going to work for the BAs, playing stuff back to them, going to the head of the practice and saying, this is what we want to do, what's the best way to achieve it, how does it line up with everything else you're trying to do, is this the right way we can deliver value to you, and all this sort of stuff. So absolutely involved. It's got to be led from the people themselves.
Yes, yeah. And so creating that environment or that atmosphere where they feel empowered to be able to bring ideas and solutions to the table.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really challenging once you get into bigger organizations with fragmented distribution. So, like a branch network for a bank, for example. But, I think just loads of comms, loads of change management, usual stuff, really.
Yes, yeah. And now, again, for someone that's listening and they're learning about business process management and the value it can bring in organization and how do you get buy-in and different things like that, what are some objections? What are some of the more common objections that they may face when, I guess, introducing the idea of business process management to their organization?
Probably every objection that you can think of, I'll have heard of. I actually had, in my roles, I had the head honcho for the BA team saying they didn't see there was a need for common process mapping notation. And I'm like, I just didn't know where to go from there. I said, but if somebody does a diamond, how do you know whether it means, all of the next paths or just some of them or one of them? But yeah, no, that was really, really hard. I'm just trying to think of some of the objections that we've had. Just the usual, this is the way we've always done it, blah, blah, blah. I think with I always remember the Satir change curve. This is one of my favorite models. It's by a family psychologist called Virginia Satir. and she's basically says that stuff just drags along. It's not very good, and it's not very good, and it's not very good. She uses this in family psychology, actually. You can use it for process and change management as well. Not very good, not very good. And you just reach a point where you can't go on any longer, and you go, something's got to change. You just reach that point where you go, I can't cope with this anymore. Something's got to change. And you put a change in. And what the important thing to remember is that stuff gets worse before it gets better. So people have got the muscle memory, if you like, from knowing exactly what it was like to do that process, because it's a new process, so they're slower. So support people through that, take them through this actually change curve or whatever, and then it's at some point something happens where people think it's called a transformational idea, where some people go, oh, we couldn't have done that before. Oh, this is actually loads better than what we were doing before. And then you come up, and then you eventually you get to your optimal point of, an improved level of performance, the new normal, if you like. So for me, it's just getting to that. What is being really clear on the business problem you're trying to solve.
Yes.
So getting to that point where people realize that it's not acceptable to go on like that any longer.
Yes.
And that's different, for everybody. So the credit card disputes team, they were coming in every 4 weeks on the weekend, like I said, and they were thoroughly miserable. They were at that point, you could see it. And I think one of the best things for me in my career actually is, going down at that team after the new team leader came along, bless him. And they were all smiling. It was like a weight had lifted off their shoulders. They were laughing and joking with each other. They were like a normal team.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's being really clear on the problem that you're trying to solve, because the problem that you're trying to solve isn't necessarily going to resonate with the people who need to change.
Right.
So you're really clear on what the story is, what the benefits are going to be. You need to just understand what people are facing into every day, because what you think is a problem, they might actually think it's all right. So for those individual changes to process, you've just got to be really, really, really clear that you understand what people are going through. And it's a cliche and stuff, but you actually have to care. You have to care that these people are coming in and looking really miserable every day, because you don't want people to live like that.
No.
I don't know if you've ever had to hate. I have, from time to time, occasionally. And dreaded getting out of bed in the morning. I don't want anybody to feel like that.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
So have that empathy, and for people, just take the time and listen to people properly.
And I think that's a great point there about, I guess it's more of the EQ side of things, where it's it may not be super tangible, I guess, indicators or things that you're recognizing that, like, when we're talking about people wanting to come into work, and are they actually enjoying the work they're doing. But I think, you're so right. When you come into a culture where people actually want to rock up every day, and they want to go to work because they feel empowered, and they feel like the work they're doing is making a difference, and they're excited about what they're doing, and they're excited about the future and what's ahead. I think that's really the culture that you're trying to foster or encourage, and I think then that's going to produce a lot of the tangible results, I guess, if you've got people that actually want to be there. But I read an article this morning, actually, and it was an article written back in 1994. So it was quite an interesting take on, I guess, the world of business back then, and I guess that difference between organizations, or the two sides were preservation versus creation. And it was talking about this idea of organizations spending so much time, effort, and energy on preserving how they currently do things, their current processes, how they currently deliver value, versus the idea of creation. Well, what does the future look like? How are we creating the future? Are we going to sit back and let the future happen and we'll just adapt to it and try and keep up? Or are we actually going to be the one that pioneers the future and creates the new normal, or the new way of delivering value? What's your, I guess, experience in that, is in, I guess, that balance between improving the processes and the way that the organization currently delivers value versus creating new processes and new ways of generating revenue or delivering value that are completely radical or completely different to how it's been done in the past? And I guess the other point to add to that is, the last 10, 15 years, we've seen startup companies totally disrupt entire industries. And so I guess organizations these days need to be agile, I guess, or quick to adapt, quick to create the future. Otherwise, another organization will do that for them. So.
Yeah, I think transformation must be one of the most overused words on CVs in the history of mankind. I put in a new CRM, transformation. Oh no, transformation is, for me, it's technology, people, and process, and you need all three for it to be considered transformation. I'm just thinking about that. I mean, that's a great question. I've got a huge amount of time and energy for process improvement and lean and Six Sigma and and all that sort of stuff. And I think we need also to acknowledge that an average bank, a frontline person has to manage know how to do about 200 or 300 different processes. So running lean process improvement over them one at a time, it's not really fast enough.
Right.
Save your pre-process improvement activities for your key moments of truth. Your key points of competitive advantage, or where you've decided you want to have competitive advantage, and your transformation. That's what you're talking about. That whole new way of doing things. If I think about banking, you have quite high barriers to entry in terms of compliance. I say that, but then you have stuff that comes along that isn't banking. Like Afterpay. So young people are Afterpay. They're not credit cards.
True.
So that's I think how that's going to play out over the coming years is going to be really interesting. What's another thing? Apple Pay. Again, rather than Visa, Mastercard. I mean, it still uses the bank's networks, a different UI and stuff like that. I'm just trying to think what would transform banking, because you got to kind of think beyond what there is today. But yeah, we're living in extremely exciting times, and you don't know whose industry is going to be disrupted next.
Yes.
Taxis weren't ready for Uber. Kodak definitely wasn't ready for photography going digital. All that sort of stuff. So yeah, I reckon I'd love to be one of these people who is one of those disruptors sort of thing, and has the ideas and does that. I mean, I have a fair few ideas and and all that sort of stuff. Or Airbnb and accommodation and stuff like that.
Yeah,
I know
true.
they do transform industries and stuff, but how many people are actually those sorts of people? How many people are like Steve Jobs or Richard Branson? I'm not saying these are people I aspire to be like, but the disruptors of this world. And how many of us kind of along for the ride?
Yeah, and I think sometimes it kind of happens out of circumstance. Like the Airbnb guys, they were struggling to pay their rent one month, and so to avoid getting evicted at the end of the month, they had to find a way to earn a little bit of extra cash. So they bought 3 blow-up air mattresses, stuck them in their lounge, and then that's how it kind of started. But another one that comes to mind is Netflix and Blockbuster, which I read something just the other day about Netflix approached Blockbuster back in 2000, or so long ago, so like back in the early days when they were just trying to get started, and said, we'll be your online arm. This is Netflix talking to Blockbuster, and Blockbuster turned them down. And then these days, I don't even know if Blockbuster's around anymore, but we've all heard of Netflix. So it's quite interesting how industries are completely changed. But I guess that kind of leads into my next question, which is about the future of BPM and looking at the next 2, 3, 5 years. You touched on robotic process automation there, and there are certainly other technologies like process mining and other things that are being talked about more and more. But I guess looking forward, and obviously there is, every organization is at a different maturity level and will require different things at different times. But over the next 2, 3, 5 years, where do you think organizations should be focusing on when it comes to managing their processes?
So RPA was really interesting. I think about 50% of RPA initiatives failed based on, I can't remember if it was Deloitte or EY or something like that. And I'm not surprised, really, having been through it. And we were moderately successful, I'd like to say. But you'd never get rid of the basics. So queue management, it doesn't matter whether it's, even if everything's automated, you still got to manage your queues. You still got to know what your internal processes need to deliver to customers at key moments of truth or in order to be successful. So it doesn't, a lot of, the basics don't change. A process is a process at the end of the day. And the only way we deliver value to our customers in any industry is through the delivery of our business processes, right? You can't deliver value to customers without a business process. You can have technology, you can have people, but if everyone's just milling about, no customer value. So the fundamentals of process don't change. I think there will be more automation, but I'll call it proper automation, not RPA, because RPA tends to be really valuable where you've got systems that don't talk to each other, and you've got legacy that's too expensive to solve for at point-to-point integration or whatever. But I don't know how much longer organizations can limp along with, technology stacks that have been built over decades, sort of thing.
Right.
And it's going to be really interesting to see where that goes. Is it going to be that RPA actually becomes critical to what we do, or actually competitors come in, they start up, they've got a new tech stack from scratch, and they just blow everybody else out the water? Could very well be either. I'd like to think that there wouldn't be a need for RPA. I'd like to think that we got our technology to a state where it's easily changeable, but I don't. But the process mining, I think, is really critical. So for particularly for people, operated processes. So that's the bit I haven't touched on very much, is that process adherence. And I think that process mining is critical for that, because your process maps at best are going to cover, I don't know, maybe 80-90% of scenarios if you're lucky.
Yeah.
Find out what we really do, and particularly in financial services, which is highly regulated, for compliance, I think that's incredibly important. Just being able to see what really happens, because you need to be able to prove to your regulator, and if you can prove it proactively rather than reactively, that we developed this process, it's working well, rather than having to do hindsight checks or and all that sort of stuff. So I'm really doing a lot more about process mining, definitely process automation, whether it's RPA or not. I don't know. I'm gonna say no. We're gonna get our technology sorted.
Yes. And then for someone listening right now that, we've been talking for, 45 minutes now, and they've been learning about business process management, and maybe it's a new topic for them, or they've heard about it, but they've never really sort of delved into it. Where should that person go, or where would you encourage that person to go to learn more about BPM? Because obviously, if there are, there's the internet, but sometimes it can be quite overwhelming, and sometimes you don't know, well, what information is applicable to my situation in this current state. So where would you encourage that person to go?
Just stalk people on LinkedIn. And I would definitely, I am possibly Roger Tregear's #1 fan. I've definitely from the Roger Tregear fan club. I love his 7 enablers of BPM.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Google Roger, find his 7 enablers of BPM. And if you read them, you've pretty much got it.
Yes. Okay. That's amazing. That's perfect.
I'll pay for that endorsement, by the way.
Well, Sandra, I just want to thank you for sitting down with me today. You know, as I said, we were speaking for just over 45 minutes, and I know that the people that will be listening to this, they're going to glean a lot of value from it. It is, you know, really valuable and great insight to hear from someone that isn't learning about this in theory or researching this, but you're actually putting it into practice, and you're encountering problems and hurdles and curveballs, and it's making you question things, it's making you think. And I think that's really valuable when people like myself and other people that are listening to this can learn from people like yourself that are going through it right now. So I just want to thank you for sitting down with me today and sharing your knowledge and all of the many stories that you've shared with us.
Thanks. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about process for 45 minutes. I don't get it that often, so